Soon, Disneyland Forward will allow Disneyland to create 300-foot icons inside of its park. And if you're trying to figure out right now just how tall is 300 feet, Mickey's Fun Wheel is 150. So imagine something twice as tall as Mickey's Fun Wheel. That's pretty tall. So if and when Disneyland Forward gets approved, Disney would have the ability to create up to 4 300-foot tall thematic icons inside of Disneyland and DCA. The current height requirement is 250 feet, and anything at 250 feet would be the new champion at the Disneyland Resort by about 70 feet taller than anything else. So just because they're allowed to doesn't mean that they will, but a boy can dream, and that's what this channel is all about. Following the design of Disneyland by studying the past to better predict the future. Thank you so much for subscribing to Hey Brickey Today. So they haven't abused this, but I do feel like they want room for whatever could happen in the future. And this doesn't mean that they will make 4 different icons that will be 300 feet exactly, but it gives them the ability to do so if the idea comes to them. A lot of what we're seeing in Disneyland Forward, I don't expect it to overall change what we know happening right now in Disneyland and DCA proper. However, all of this has so much to do with what our expectations should be on this parking lot, the parking lot on the other side of the Pixar Hotel, and the Toy Story parking lot. Those are really the 3 hubs of future growth and development. Those are the areas where these new sightline regulations are going to have the most transformation. They are not currently zoned for thematic icons. So Disneyland Forward will give those 2 spaces the ability to put some sort of wayfinding building inside of those parks to help guests better navigate their way through a Disneyland that in the future might be somewhat sloppy to navigate. Now, if you're wondering what will Disneyland look like after Disneyland Forward, don't worry, most buildings will range between 40 feet and rarely would you see anything probably make it beyond 250 feet. They're not going to go wild with this. This proposal just gives them the ability to scale that high if and when needed. And it's a deal with the city of Anaheim that they can only do this so many times and in so many locations. And while building something 250 feet tall isn't the full 300 feet, I do want to point out that that is 100 feet taller than the Matterhorn stands today. So still pretty huge, and I do think anything that gets to be 150 feet or taller will make a significant difference for the sight lines of Disneyland, but also outside of the gates for the citizen of Anaheim. Whereas Matterhorn is one of those items that you can see for quite some distance. And I think that more of those could enrich the experience not only for us the guests, but as well for travelers coming in from out of town, that many more hotels will soon have a Disneyland view. Disneyland Forward is just more of the massaging of the relationship between the city of Anaheim and Disneyland. But where this new zoning for Disneyland Forward is super important is, don't forget, soon we're going to potentially see theme park expansion over here in this parking lot and the one on the other side of the Disneyland Hotel. So therefore, Disneyland Forward would give Disney the ability to put large structures in here, icons, to draw people further into the Disneyland story. Currently, these properties are not zoned for any thematic buildings, but there's a certain way that this property has to be managed so that everything is friendlier to the guest on the outside of the future home of Disneyland. Now for the development over at the Toy Story parking lot, which I do believe ultimately will become the 3rd theme park. The rules are going to be a little bit different. That area will be permitted to have one 200-foot tall structure placed on it due to its proximity to the homes on each side of that soon-to-be 3rd gate. And to keep it polite, something we'll be talking about later on in today's video, whatever is put there will have a stair-stepping design so that the lowest edge of the building is near the residents, and then it will stair-step up to us in the park. But we'll get to that later on, as also the sight lines are going to start changing at Disneyland once Disneyland Forward gets approved and new construction finds its way. With the potential new layout of Disneyland requiring guests to cross bridges going across the current Disneyland Way into the hotel parking lots that exist today, some thematic icons could really help guests figure out where exactly they're trying to go. But then there's also what I believe will be the third park coming down in the old Toy Story parking lot, where something down there could really help guests figure out just how far away they are from the new part of the Disneyland Resort and vice versa. Guests that have started their day down at the third gate will easily be able to cruise down Harbor or through Garden Walk and figure out how far away they are from the icons up inside of Disneyland and DCA at the resort proper. So aside from also helping to sell merch, they also act as a wayfinding device for guests to help them navigate their way around the park. Walt liked to use a certain term, but I don't use it. It's one of the few times I go against Walt. And once the park has this new, unique, kind of messy shape as Disney's navigating around everything that exists, it's not ideal. It's not the way that you would draw it up if you had a blank slate like what they had at Walt Disney World. You're gonna need icons, big buildings in this parking lot and the next one to lure people over. Oh, where's the new Wakanda land? Where's Frozen at? People are gonna wanna see that icon and figure out, oh yeah, the kids wanna go over there. That's where the new thing is. So as far as what we'll see actually get built on Disneyland proper, my expectations for that are rather low. But over here, that's where my expectations are very, very high. And including over inside of the Toy Story parking lot, that area is really gonna need an icon. Something to draw people further down Harbor, to let people know, where's the third park at? Let's talk about how tall icons help establish wayfinding, or creating a North Star around a city, or in this case, a theme park. I lived in the great city of Toronto, Ontario for 4 amazing years. And Toronto has the Space Needle that sits on the southernmost edge of the city. And when you live in Toronto, you always know that if you can find the Space Needle, you can find south, therefore figuring out where north, east, and west all are. If through Disneyland Forward, Disneyland decides to build some of these very tall thematic icons, it will help guests navigate around a theme park that soon won't be quite as simple as Disneyland to the north, DCA to the south, as we will have 2 potential expansions on the west, a 3rd theme park down in the old Toy Story parking lot. So a thematic icon could help guests navigate further down Harbor or back up to the resort, or also give them an idea of, I want to keep going west to find the new Wakanda land or to find the new Frozen land. Now, height alone isn't the only thing that's going to be affected once Disneyland Forward gets approved, as new heights isn't the only restriction they're trying to change. What's up, my man? Disneyland Forward also intends to adapt and change the visual language of the Disneyland Resort. The Disneyland sightlines will be changing, but also a couple of other important rules as Disney adjusts the visual language of the style guide for the Disneyland Resort, creating a unified visual experience that not only enhances the beauty, but works well with the Disneyland Resort's neighbors. So one of the other design aesthetics that Disneyland Forward will introduce to the Disneyland Resort is a stair-step design method, where the top stair will always face us, the guests, and the bottom stair will always face the folks that live on the outside of the park. Therefore, creating perfect sightlines for us when we're in the story, but creating the biggest space possible from the people that live outside the story. This pushed the peak of the building design further away from the guests, reducing visual pollution, but it also takes the sound and pushes it further away, reducing noise pollution. Trying to be a good neighbor is the best thing that you can do when you have a neighbor. And I, for one, applaud this because I don't really like the way the big factory-style buildings of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge looks. However, those buildings are just a road across from the parking garage, so no big deal. But I always try to think about, if I live next to Disneyland, how would that affect my opinion? And I don't think I would want that giant factory sitting right across from my home. But when we look at the Discovery Tower, the new DVC tower just added to the Disneyland Hotel, that is the example of what Disney's going to do for the future. And I believe the stair-stepping design aesthetic is the perfect compromise between what Disneyland needs, but what's fair to the folks that live on the other side of the street. But how will these new guidelines affect the guest experience? When Disneyland places the tallest edge of a sight line right in front of the guests, this puts us inside of the story. Pushing it as close as possible blocks out everything on the back side, making sure no visual distractions get in the way. When this is paired with a tight corridor like what we see in Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, it fully immerses us in the Disney story, but making things like the Pixar Pal parking lot and Mickey and Friends directly behind us disappear. Expect more of this when Disneyland expands west into the parking lots that sit on the other side of Disneyland and Disney's California Adventure, because there we will need to create some tight sight lines to make hotels and parking garages disappear. So if this is how tight the sight lines are across the street from the parking garage, imagine how big the sight lines are going to have to be when we're right next to the parking garage. Probably beyond a doubt though, my favorite thing that Disney is committing to is any icon that breaks the horizon line of Disneyland, so say about 50 feet, will be rendered 360. That means we will see more things like Big Thunder Mountain, Matterhorn, items that are in the interior of the park that have a full 360 render, versus items like Tiana's Bayou Adventure that's pushed to an outer edge. So one side is fully rendered for us, but the other side we never see. What I'm excited for the city of Anaheim though, is that this requirement of the fully rendered buildings is going to make Disneyland so much more attractive outside of the gates. We all know how rough Radiator Racers looked on the backside. The requirement for the fully rendered icons inside of the park will not only create a better experience for guests inside of Disneyland, but a much better experience for guests outside the gates. Fully 360 rendered icons inside of Disneyland have me so excited. And once I saw they were committing to this, I got even more excited about Disneyland Forward, as if that was even possible. If you're still confused on exactly how tall 300 feet is, make sure you watch this video right here where I rank the 13 tallest buildings inside of Disneyland. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a good time.